Welcome back, pugnacious pummelers. I'm Lupine Fiasco, and this is Daily Fab Gameplay. I started my Jarl gameplay reviews this week and want to talk about the list I'm playing with all of you to share my thoughts on card choices. I'm labeling this as a deck tech, but will admit that I don't intend to play Jarl at even a tier 2 level for the time being. While I'm having a lot of fun with him and he can be very powerful, Enigma's tournament representation is climbing, and outside of specific builds or great variants, Jarl's chance of winning that matchup is easily sub 20%. I'm happy to give free wins to my locals or dodge the hero on Talishar, but I don't see myself straying from Aurora, Fi, or hopefully Syndra at February's Road to National season. But Enigma aside, or if you want to play Gen Roulette and attempt to dodge her, I still want to be competitive. Dual Elemental Guardian has the biggest card pool in Classic Constructed, and there are dozens of ways to build the hero. I don't claim that this is the best way to do it, but it's what I'm trying for now. So far, it's felt pretty good. If you want to follow along with the deck tech or even try the deck for yourself, there's a Fabry link in the video description below. While you're down there, be sure to subscribe to my channel, join my Discord, follow me on Blue Sky, and check out my Patreon benefits. I've separated this video into many different chapters, but the overarching sections that I'll discuss are the cards I'm playing, notable exclusions, and possible changes to experiment with. Starting with my equipment, it's important to note that my deck wants to decompose. Gauntlets of the Boreal Domain and Rootbound Trunks generate less value than Gauntlets of Iron Will and Civic Steps, but they put Earth cards into my graveyard when broken. Gauntlets of the Boreal Domain also fill a very niche role as a resource sink. You won't use it for anything but blocking 99% of the time, but occasionally you'll use it to get cards out of your hand and into your pitch zone. However, your best resource sink is Coronet Peak. While not as defensively valuable as Crown of Providence, Peak gives you the option to slow down the game while you look for hands that take tempo. You'll see in a bit that I'm not playing Titan's Hist in this list, and this deck runs more 0 and 2 block blues than I'd like, and Peak is a solid way to get 3 points of value out of them when your opponent's turn dictated that you needed to defend rather than attack. Peak also shines to get ice cards into your pitch zone for Channel Lake Frigid and, more importantly, Channel Mount Ison. Its flexibility as a disruptive tool, resource sink, and 2-block piece of armor makes Peak very appealing to me. Fiendal's Spring Tunic is a common inclusion for Guardians, with its most popular lines being to target Command and Conquer with Pummel, or attack the Sledge of Anvilheim with only a single blue in hand. In our turn, it also allows us to play Polar Blast or So Tomorrow from Arsenal, letting us turn that resource into a small effect and an entire card. Summit has been catching flack lately. The fact that it costs 6 and starts at 4 power when paired with Stalagmite is obviously worse than playing Titan's Fist or even Anothos, but there are a few things that it does very well. First, it allows you to play Stalagmite, one of the best defensive cards in the game when played against redline decks. Second, it attacks for 6 with an on-hit Frostbite after you've broken your Stalagmite. And third, it gives you an easy way to pitch 2 ice cards for Channel Lake Frigid's second turn on the board. Of course, I wish I could play with Winter's Wail, but Summit hasn't felt as bad to me as the others make it out to be. Moving on to the main deck, I'll start with the exciting cards, the reds. Every red in the deck is either disruptive or a defense reaction. Pummel is, of course, our beloved, and the reason anyone would play Guardian. While it pairs well with any attack, the best reasons to play it are Command and Conquer and Frostfang. Both are 2-cost attacks that let us use a Tunic resource to turn 3 cards into 9 or 10 damage with multiple disruptive on-hits. Icequake also pairs very well with both attacks. A blue pays for the pump and the swing. Felling of the Crown is why I'm building towards being able to decompose. A 2-card 8 that strips a card from the opponent before they can interact with it is incredibly powerful. Oaken Old takes a little more effort, but the on-hit effect is easily the strongest play that Jarl is capable of. Of course, pair Pummel with either of these effects and your opponent's turn is basically over. Red Winter's Bite has impressed me quite a bit. Not only is it good as a one-card play, especially when the Jarl trigger generates a Frostbite, but it's even stronger when part of a larger hand. Guardians can have a lot of trouble converting large hands offensively when ahead, so including natural go again to use 3 or 4 cards when not incentivized to block is extremely helpful. When Winter's Bite can take a card from your opponent and tax any possible defense reactions before you send a disruptive on hit, that's when Jarl is at his gnarliest. Finally, I'm playing 6 defense reactions, Rootbound Carapace and Sink Below. Rootbound accomplishes 2 goals. Playing it puts an Earth card into discard and can also decompose to turn on Felling. Sink Below is a known quantity by now. Blocking for 4 is good, and fixing a bad hand is even better. I'll talk about Plow Under and why I'm not playing it in a bit, but with no other yellows in the main deck, let's talk about the blues. Autumn's Touch is easily the worst blue in the deck, though it fills a few important roles. It is an Earth card for the sake of Fuse and Decompose, and it blocks for 3. Aside from that, every blue in our deck is situationally useful, though some more than others. Blue Winter's Bite fills the same niche as the red version in that it's disruption with natural go again no matter the hand size. What we need to be aware of is how much worse it pairs with Coronet Peak and Frostfang. An opponent who pitches a blue to the Winter's Bite effect will have resources available to pay for Peak or Frostfang without needing to spend an extra card, so beware of trying to make that play against decks with a lot of blues. Blizzard is one of the best anti-aggro cards available to Jarl, and generating a defensive Frostbite when your opponent is missing armor makes it even better. You'll often board this out for better options against slower decks, but it is game-winning in the matchups in which it truly shines. Channeling Frigid is an old staple of Old-Handed Icelander and continues to shine in Jarl. Being an Ice 3-block blue is reason enough to consider playing it, but the heavy tax it imposes on your opponents can be backbreaking. The detriment to go-wide aggro is obvious, but it has utility against slower heroes as well. This affects all cards and abilities, including defense reactions, instants like Count Your Blessings, and activated abilities like Enigmas. Channel Mount Ison is a new card from the Jarl Precon, which is much less powerful than its frigid cousin, but gives Ice a new win con all the same. Against a low health opponent with open equipment slots, playing Channel Mount Ison not only taxes their turn but threatens to kill them with loss of life. There isn't any effective way to dodge this effect once it happens. Loss of life can't be prevented by cards like Oasis Respite or effects like Arcane Barrier, and because the effect happens at the start of the turn rather than the start of the action phase, the affected player doesn't have a priority window. The only effective way to stop the loss of life is to clear the Frostbites on our turn. Pay attention to whether your opponent has defense reactions or other instant speed effects left in their deck before deciding how to proceed. Notably, Channel Mount Ison costs 0 to play. While this is great for triggering Jarl, it does mean that you'll need to find a way to get an ice card into your pitch zone to pay its flow cost. Coronet Peak is the easiest way to do this, but you could also use your Gauntlets or Summit if your hand allows for it. Crumble to Eternity has a few important roles in the deck, but most important is its dual element typing. Being able to fuse Oaken Old with a single card is massively impactful because you only need a 3-card hand to do it. Play Oaken Old, pitch blue, reveal Crumble twice, Arsenal Crumble is incredibly powerful, and you aren't even embarrassed to play Crumble on a later turn. Besides fusing, Crumble is a strong turn 1 play either on its own or with Imposing Visage. Putting your opponent into a position where they've lost armor value and are vulnerable to frozen to death is big game. Finally, Crumble is a blue 3-block that also fuels Decompose. Speaking of frozen to death, it is mostly in the deck to be a blue 3-block ice card. While the effect is strong when combined with Crumble or simply after your opponent has blocked with Battle-Worn or Temper armor, the card costs 3, doesn't have Go Again, and needs to fuse with ice to destroy armor. This isn't to say that you shouldn't look for opportunities to play it, but that you'll need to be careful not to overvalue the effect. Taking a ton of damage or completely giving up tempo just to snipe a piece of armor likely isn't worth the effect, but that value calculation is always subject to context. The games in which you can open with a crumble, block with a card from hand, pitch to Frozen to Death and fuse with something like Winter's Bite or Polar Blast, then arsenal that fuse target, all by turn 2 are games where you're more likely to stabilize or even stay ahead. Fruits of the Forest may be a 2-block, but its flexibility as an attack, a way to gain life at instant speed, and fuel for Decompose makes it a Jarl staple. Your strongest play with this will be to fuse it and an ice card with Oaken Old, then discard it to its effect before end of turn to avoid the intellect penalty. Discarding it on the first turn to start at 42 or as a response to your own felling effect is also very good. Glacial Footsteps is here to end games with Dominate or simply convert larger hands to offense. Note that you'll want to board this out against new so that she can't banish and smack you with it. Imposing Visage is a Guardian staple, and Jarl can use it to good effect. As previously mentioned, it lets you find Crumble for early armor hate. You also get to avoid the lack of Go Again on Crumble, allowing you to follow up with additional disruption if you have it. You can also find Channeling Frigid if you have an extra Ice Blue in hand to pitch into the card. Polar Blast, like Winter's Bite, is a fuse target for Oaken Old and Frozen to Death that you aren't embarrassed to put into your arsenal. It can also help you convert large hands and, as previously mentioned, will let you turn a Tunic resource into a full card when played from Arsenal. Rounding out the main deck is Pulse of Isenloft, another Oldhim staple. Like Crumble, the primary reason to play Pulse is that it can provide both Oaken Old fuse requirements by itself, allowing for a 3-card 9 with Dominate and a devastating on-hit that leaves you with an Arsenal card. Beyond that, a defensive 2 for 6 that can provide additional value against go-wide opponents is a very valuable effect. Keep in mind that playing Pulse will trigger Jarl, potentially taxing your opponent out of taking the rest of their turn. Moving into the sideboard, we start with red Glacial Footsteps. A 3-card 10, potentially with Dominate, can be a good way to close out a game or strip cards from a low-health opponent. And while I did say that I'm not keeping Enigma top of mind, a 10 power attack is an excellent way to force resources away from her to protect a board of auras. In contrast, Staunch Response is great for protecting us from big dumb damage, and lets us convert more cards on defense when necessary. Remembrance isn't a card that I've used in the past, but I am told that it's vital for the Guardian Mirror and for new. The logic tracks. Being able to refill our deck with Oaken Olds or Fellings once we get down to the dregs, especially when we've been pitching our dual element blues and blocking with our earth cards, gives us an incredible late game. I wasn't expecting to like Exposed to the Elements as much as I do, but it has really impressed me lately. It can be difficult to put both halves together, and you're better off not committing too much health to do so, but even the Ice Fusion alone can be worth the investment. Jarl becomes much more effective as a hero when he can start generating Frostbite, and there is a lot of equipment in the meta with a base armor value of 0. At worst, you force an enemy hero to skip their arsenal for a turn. At best, you can get massively ahead. So Tomorrow is a combination of hand conversion, decompose fuel, anti-fatigue, and earth fusion, as well as a solid card to arsenal after fusing and to pay for with Tunic. While it only blocks for 2 and isn't a card that I want to see multiples of in a hand, the fact that it has so many uses excites me. One very important detail of So Tomorrow is that it banishes itself after resolution. This matters for Felling of the Crown. If you haven't decomposed when you play your first Felling, you won't benefit from its first line of text. However, playing So Tomorrow says that you only need 3 more Earth cards in Banish, not 4. Banishing 2 Earth cards and an Earth action to decompose will then activate Felling, giving you the 2-card 8 that you're aiming for. Heart of Ice and Nullrune Boots will both come in for the Kano matchup, and activating Heart at the start of each turn will force him to either commit to his turn while you have almost an entire grip, or take the turn off to block. Either way, you'll maintain life total and hopefully pressure him with Disruption. Nullrune Boots is incredibly valuable against Runeblades. Our high blue count means that we'll likely have plenty of resources available to prevent Runechant damage. I don't know yet that I would recommend attempting to fatigue Runeblade as a primary strategy, but I've already done it by mistake simply by sustaining through their impactful effects. Finally, Sledge of Anvilheim is a valuable tool in long grindy games, or where I might want resources available for Arcane Barrier on my turn. Cough, Kano, cough. In grindy matchups, being able to block for 9 and attack for 6 every third turn may sound boring, but is a solid way to keep your life total stable while your opponent burns through their threats. As much as I like Summit, a good Sledge is a valuable tool to have. These are the 80 cards that I've chosen to start playing with, but they will shift as my understanding of the hero deepens and I get more experience with him. You may have noticed some notable cards missing from the list. I've collected a few of them in the maybe board and will talk a bit about why I've chosen not to include them. I'd be remiss if I didn't start by talking about Mangle and Unforgetting Unforgiving. Aren't these the entire reason to play Jarl? For God's sake, he's in the card art. For one thing, I've learned in even my limited number of games that putting the first -1 counter on a piece of equipment is much harder than I thought it would be. Enticing your opponent to block with armor is the easiest way to do it, but if they don't, our only ways to do so are with Crumble or Exposed to the Elements. Playing the first, especially when you have other plays available, represents an incredible loss in tempo. The second takes a commitment of at least 3 cards, and keeping those may mean taking far more damage than you should. Then, even if you do manage to get that first -1 counter down, you still need to trigger Mangle's effect. Here's the thing that Guardian players don't want you to know. Crush sucks. It truly is a forgotten mechanic. Heroes universally block better than they did in the days of Bravo, both by having more 3 blocks and better armor. So, without the help of Pummel or Gauntlets of Boreal Domain, the chance that you trigger Mangle's Crush effect is very low. But let's say that you've put the -1 counter down, you've pitched Earth to your Gauntlets, and your opponent is unwilling to cover the 7 points of damage to prevent the Crush effect. For all of that, you have accomplished very little. Your resource investment over at least 2 turns has resulted in taking a bunch of damage without presenting any disruption. You'll now need a 3rd turn to start generating Frostbite value. Ultimately, my problem with Mangle is that it doesn't do anything to slow down your opponents. In the time it took you to destroy Aurora's Grasp of the Arknight, she presented 30 damage. Sen transcended twice, Viserai created 8 rune chants, and all for you to deal 8 damage and have a concept of Frostbites. Sure, Mangle gets better when you're able to tutor it with Unforgetting Unforgiving, but we find ourselves readdressing the first issue. Putting that first -1 counter down can be too difficult to be practical. Everything I said about Mangle applies to Spinal Crush, though I do like that Spinal Crush has a disruptive effect and that it can be pummeled with Tunic. Enlightened Strike is likely worth including for Enigma to go wide enough to break a Miragai, but I find myself wanting to avoid teching too hard for a bad matchup when I could instead try to dodge it. I don't value E-Strike outside of Illusionist, as I'm generally able to convert full hands in a meaningful way without it, and E-Strike cannot be pummeled. Fate Foreseen and Rootbound Carapace occupy the same slot. If I decide that Felling of the Crown isn't worth running the rest of the Decompose package for, then that's an easy 1-for-1 swap. Plow Under occupies an odd spot in my value estimation. The effect is strong and easily pummelable, but paying 2 to attack for 2 feels awful. Playing Felling with an empty Banish Zone feels bad enough, but 4 damage at least feels better, and the Decompose effect is guaranteed to do something. I've heard the argument that Plow is at least a yellow 3 block, but that's also to its detriment. In a deck with Coronet Peak, Summit, Sledge, Felling, and Oakenold, why would I want a yellow when I need a blue instead? If the best thing that I can say about Plow Under in most situations is that it's an Earth 3 block, then I'd prefer a different card. Macho Grande is a great card that will be unplayable until New leaves the format. Glacial Footsteps has similar issues but is at least playable off of 2 blues, and I can board it out against her. I've briefly talked about Civic Steps when comparing it to Rootbound Trunks, Like Fate Foreseen, this is a direct upgrade to the deck if I ever cut Felon. Finally, Tectonic Crust and Tectonic Plating by extension both provide more defense than Fiandal Spring Tunic, but ultimately less overall value. 2 more points of block value and some Seismic Surge tokens don't compensate for a 1-card 6 with Sledge or a 3-card 10 with multiple on-hits from CNC Pummel. 2 cards I didn't mention are Summer's Fall and Nullrune Hood, the reason being that they will very likely be in this list by the time you're watching this video. Summer's Fall is extremely appealing for a couple of reasons, namely offensive decompose and an extra 2 for 6 to pummel. While it doesn't provide the same level of disruption as my other red attacks do, I'm willing to overlook that. I need more attacks in general. This list as presented only has 21, and I've been in multiple spots where I have a pummel in Arsenal and Tunic on 3 for more than 2 turns without seeing an attack. After a certain point, that isn't variance, that's a build issue. The swap will be for Rootbound Carapace. While I'm hesitant to lower my average block value, I can at least keep my red and earth ratios identical to what they are here. Nullrune Hood feels like a card that's worth playing for Kano, as AB2 leaves me with resources on the table while lowering the bar for him to draw with Open the Floodgates. The only reason that Hood isn't in this deck currently is that finding space for it is kind of tough. I think the cut will end up being a copy of Blizzard. Jarl is already very capable of controlling the speed at which aggro decks can play against him, and a copy of Sotomar will probably make its way into the main board. It isn't good in every situation, but it does provide marginal benefit to the deck in a few different ways, and will likely be worth the inclusion. I'll keep you all updated, and you'll see the results for yourself in gameplay reviews. Jarl has been a blast to play with, and I have truly enjoyed becoming the bully that I've raged against for so long. A wise man once said, "You either die a hero or live long enough to lock a ninja out of their turn with Blizzard." Let me know in the comments what Jarl tech you've been experimenting with. Is there anything that I'm missing or anything that I should try? I'll be playing with this hero at least until January, so give me your hot tech. Until the next time I see you on Daily Fab Gameplay, stay frosty.